Imagine a world still bleeding from the First War. Countries broken, economies shattered, millions desperate for answers. And then, in the shadows, decisions were made that would ignite a conflict bigger than anyone could imagine. One invasion, one miscalculation, one unchecked ambition, and the world would never be the same. What really triggered World War II? The answer isn't simple, and it's closer than you think. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see how a series of choices unleashed a war that consumed the world. I'm 80 years old now, and I've spent decades looking at history, reading old letters, diaries, and accounts from people who lived through times I can barely imagine. When I think about how World War II started, I don't just see battles or treaties. I see a chain of human choices, stubbornness, fear, and ambition, all piling up until the world was caught in a storm it couldn't escape. It's strange to look back and realize that no one person caused the war. Asterisk, it didn't begin with a single act of evil or a sudden invasion. Asterisk, it began slowly, quietly, in ways that seemed reasonable at the time. Economies collapsed. Democracies hesitated. Leaders misjudged. Asterisk, and ordinary people, desperate for hope, followed voices that promised certainty in a world full of uncertainty. Germany, in particular, was a nation bleeding after the First World War. The war was over, but the punishment had only begun. The Treaty of Versailles humiliated Germany, stripping it of land, wealth, and something far more fragile. Pride. Imagine a country forced to sign a document that declared it fully responsible for a war it had fought and lost. Not shared blame, not partial guilt. All of it. The economic weight alone would have crushed almost any nation. Massive reparations, soaring inflation, factories closing, jobs disappearing. Money became worthless overnight. Life savings vanished. Families who had survived the war now found themselves standing in breadlines, wondering how they would survive peace. People went hungry. Homes were lost. Hope quietly drained away, and when people are hungry, when they are desperate, they don't look for complexity. They look for someone to blame. And in that silence, in that pain, the seeds of something far darker began to grow.
Onto that vacuum stepped Adolf Hitler. He was not a great hero of the First World War, not a celebrated general, but he had volunteered, and he carried the defeat as a personal wound. He felt the humiliation deeply, and more importantly, he understood it. He knew how to speak to wounded pride, how to turn anger into purpose, how to give pain a direction. He promised Germany what it longed to hear: a return to greatness, a restoration of pride, order, strength, identity. And for a while, people listened. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough. Enough to give him a foothold, enough to give him a voice, and in time, enough to give him power. But Hitler alone wasn't enough to start a world war. Other nations played their roles too. Britain and France, still haunted by the scars of the First World War, desperately wanted to avoid another catastrophe. So they chose appeasement. Small acts of aggression were allowed to pass. Each time, the hope was the same: if we give a little, maybe peace will survive. When Germany reoccupied the Rhineland, the world hesitated. When Austria was absorbed, the world hesitated again. When Czechoslovakia was threatened, there were talks, meetings, negotiations. They believed these were minor moves, problems that could be managed, crises that could be negotiated away. They were wrong, but enough. Enough to give him a foothold, enough to give him a voice, and in time, enough to give him power. It's hard to overstate how much those decisions mattered. Every time a border was crossed, every time a treaty was ignored, every time the fear of another war outweighed the need to act decisively. The stage was set for something far worse. In 1939, Germany finally invaded Poland. That single act triggered declarations of war from Britain and France. But it was not sudden. The invasion was only a symptom of years of unresolved tension, of choices made under pressure, of misjudgments and miscalculations. It's easy to say, this caused the war. But the truth is darker. It was decades of decisions, fears, and ambitions colliding at the wrong moment. Meanwhile, the world beyond Germany was not innocent. The Soviet Union, Italy, and Japan were all moving down paths that would soon make the conflict global. Japan had invaded China years earlier. Italy pursued its own imperial ambitions. The world was already fracturing. No one imagined it would become a global war.
One of the most tragic truths of this period is how ordinary people were swept up in extraordinary circumstances. Farmers, clerks, teachers, factory workers, people with simple lives, caught between leaders making choices they would live to regret. Some joined the military voluntarily. Some were conscripted. Most did neither. Most simply tried to survive. Even in countries that opposed Hitler, mistakes were made. Warnings went unheard. Plans moved too slowly. Alliances were fragile. And every delay, every miscalculation, made the coming storm worse. By the time nations truly mobilized, millions were already set on a path toward death, starvation, or displacement. I've read letters from children in Poland, from mothers in France, from soldiers in Germany and Britain. Their words are haunting. They never asked for war. They only lived in a world where decisions made by the powerful carried consequences. They could never escape. It's also important to remember that this war did not begin in a single year or a single month. The roots of World War II stretched back decades. The Treaty of Versailles, the rise of nationalism, the failure of diplomacy, the Great Depression. Together, they created fertile ground for conflict. Hitler may have lit the match, but the fire was fueled by countless earlier actions, decisions, and inactions. And when the war finally began, it escalated faster than anyone imagined. Poland fell in weeks. Britain and France mobilized slowly. Germany surged into Scandinavia. The Low Countries and France, the Soviet Union, initially caught off guard, responded in time. Then Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States fully into the war. What began as a European conflict became a global catastrophe. Looking back now, I do not see the war as inevitable, but as preventable. 100 small choices could have changed history. Stronger enforcement of treaties, faster responses to aggression, less appeasement, more attention to warnings. But humans rarely act perfectly. And in this case, imperfection cost tens of millions of lives. I wonder sometimes how we look at this history today. We see the maps. We see the battles. We see the leaders. We see Hitler, Stalin, Roosevelt, Churchill. But the real story is not in the generals or the politicians. It is in the ordinary people, and in the choices that made them powerless to stop the storm. That is where the lesson lies. Not in blaming one man, but in understanding how a series of decisions can unravel the world. And so, as we examine how World War II began, I ask myself, and I ask you to think about power, fear, and responsibility. Think about the moments when nations paused, when diplomacy failed, when people looked away, hoping the problem would solve itself. These are the moments that history remembers, and sometimes history repeats. If there is a single truth I have carried for 80 years, it is this: wars are rarely born in a day. They grow quietly, almost imperceptibly. In the spaces between decisions, between hesitation, between fear and ambition, and by the time the first shot is fired, it is often too late to turn back.
I hope that by understanding how World War II began, we can see that the cost of ignoring warning signs is always paid in human lives. Millions of people did not deserve the chaos that engulfed them, yet they were caught in a chain of events that had begun long before they even knew it existed. So, as we look back at maps, treaties, and headlines from 80 years ago, we must remember the human dimension. Remember the fear, the hope, the small acts of courage, and the countless failures that led to the first truly global war of the 20th century. Because if history is to guide us, we must understand this. The world is shaped not only by leaders, but by the choices everyone makes, or fails to make, when the moment demands it. And that, ultimately, is how World War II began. Not with a single explosion, not with a single dictator, but with a series of decisions, errors, and moments of inaction that together pulled the world into fire.